Hello, everybody. Welcome back. We are in the home stretch here. This is our fifth and final video around planning for implementation specific to vocabulary. So hi, Tracy. It's good to see you again. Glad you're back.
Hello.
And so we're going to take everybody on a journey today. The focus topic for our final video is really about using vocabulary within the context of writing. And so specifically, we're going to talk about some details of writing. So like writing structures, how are students really learning and growing their skills with spelling or encoding of words while they're putting those thoughts that they have in their mind onto paper. So today we're going to take on this journey. When we think about the simple view of reading, there are skill sets here that also contribute to writing, of course. So within word recognition, there are foundational skills in phonological awareness and phonics that for sure are going to come into play as we start to apply those skills that before we were applying them to reading, and now we're going to take those skills and kind of reverse them and apply them to writing. So for sure, word recognition and word specific or sound symbol specific skills will be part of this. In addition to that, of course, students are going to be bringing to their writing their background knowledge, their experiences, and all of those things that have kind of stuck with them. We hope that there's a lot of vocabulary mixed into there, that they've really picked up a lot of vocabulary words along the way. And so they'll have very rich vocabularies in their writing. And we know that language structures are a little bit different when it comes to written thoughts and putting our ideas on paper as opposed to spoken. So there are some nuances about language structures. They're a little bit more formal in some cases, depending on the style of writing that we're engaging in. So let's take a leap here and head down this road where we're applying all the great vocabulary knowledge to writing. Tracy's going to start us off, of course, by asking those very critical, kind of essential questions.
Right. So, two things within our checklist that you can ask yourself around vocabulary selection and explicit instruction. Again, we're looking at student needs. So, do all learners, tip to tip, including complex disabilities, English learners, students who are gifted and talented, any students in diverse groups, do they have access to and actually learn grade level vocabulary? That's very important. And then secondly, did we develop and select materials for explicit instruction and assessment of vocabulary? So we're really kind of focusing on writing this time, but you can't separate out reading and writing really. So we want to keep all that in mind. It's all related back to the simple view, and enjoy the rest of the video. So our role-specific questions for this particular video for administrators are, really knowing what are you looking for when you're looking at writing instruction. And, are you as an administrator knowledgeable about the writing process and knowledgeable about access to writing? Do you have the tools in your toolbox to support those teachers? Also, what type of professional development does your staff need to be able to instruct writing for all students with fidelity? What evidence-based practices in vocabulary instruction did you observe or that encompass student expression of ideas or responses? So what you are observing in a classroom, did you see evidence-based practices around writing being implemented? That's very important. And are all students expected to write in the same manner? We're going to talk about that one. So coaches out there, what is the goal of your lesson? That's a question you could be really asking your teachers, because it is going to make a difference in if a student is expected to write or produce written letters, or if they're supposed to respond or be expected to show understanding. So knowing what the goal of the lesson is really important, and you can help your teachers with that. So also, coaches, what is the connection of the standards you're working on? And were all of the learners able to participate in that? So we're really talking about grade level standards. And Ohio is fortunate to have the extended standards and learning progressions for every standard at every grade level. So we're really trying to keep grade level work here in tier 1 instruction. Tier 2, you could work on certain skills, but we really want to keep that as a focus. Also asking teachers, what data did you collect as evidence that students know and understand the concepts, and also that they are writing and know writing structures themselves? What were the actual outcomes in relation to the predicted outcomes? So if you're writing 5 paragraphs, what was the actual outcome of that expectation? And lastly, what will be your next steps based on today's evidence? So those are kind of nice scaffolded questions for you to ask around anything, but it will really help teachers think and process through how they're utilizing writing for each lesson. So intervention specialists, or any specialist for that matter, you may be thinking about what barriers students might encounter while expressing their thoughts and ideas and knowledge through writing. You can think about universal design for learning, and what might get in the way of students being able to write and express themselves, because that's really what writing is all about. How and when can we scaffold foundational writing skills? Do we do that in tier 1? That would be awesome. And then when do we need to have some tier 2 and tier 3 intervention supports for students to build those foundational skills so that they can more readily access instruction? And then lastly, what is our target for student writing in each lesson? And how do students' particular needs, individualized needs, come into play at that point? And content specialists or general educators, you may ask yourself, what writing skills am I teaching and measuring in each lesson? We aren't just writing to write. So, what is the purpose, and am I being clear on what I'm measuring for students? How did you ensure that writing supports are integrated into the lessons to meet individual needs? Are you building those into your lessons? Are you collaborating with intervention specialists or those with expertise on supports for students and meeting their needs? Those are all questions you can ask yourself, as well as over time, are learners using vocabulary and language structures? The critical piece here is using, not just taking in receptively, but expressively using those structures through both communication and writing. And over time, are students able to encode or write, decode is more reading, more complex vocabulary using phoneme, grapheme, mapping, and morphology? So, are students able to, when they're understanding word parts, are they able to then use that knowledge to be able to automatically read or write other unfamiliar words. So keeping that in mind is, kind of a good point of interest for you. Shauna? Oh, we have a stop and think. Excellent. So, of course, this is our last session, so we're getting all tricky with you here. So we have something to think about is, have we assigned a writing task as a demonstration of knowledge in a subject area, possibly without explicitly teaching the constructs of that writing? So this gets to our teaching expectations and possibly assumptions that, well, students might have learned that in another class, but really taking stock of what students really know. If you're assigning a writing task or a writing experience, we don't want the constructs to get in the way of them being able to express themselves. So in your practices right now, kind of going through your head, you can stop and think about this together as a group and collective practices. Are you sure, that things are being explicitly taught, not just the content, but how to write about those things for different purposes? So another question we had was kind of philosophical. Is writing just orthography or physically writing letters? Or is writing thoughts and ideas captured in print? And possibly you could have a variety of decoding options. And thinking about expectations in your classrooms and thinking about expectations across your building and through the system is, what is the target? Is the target physically to write, or is it really writing is the means to capture thoughts and ideas? If so, on the first piece, on possibly not necessarily explicitly teaching constructs of writing, we may want to consider planning to include writing instruction and vocabulary integration into requests for writing products. So making sure that students know how to write before we're asking them to write about content. So this is a lot to think about, we know, but hopefully by the end of this session, you will get some ideas of how you can talk about and think about and plan for writing with all of your students.
Very good questions. I think it makes my wheels start turning already. And I think it's really powerful that we go back and think about what was the target that we have intended. So what's the standard that we're really focusing on here for our instruction? So remember at the very beginning in session 1, so now we're in session 5, in session 1, we talked about the selection of the vocabulary coming directly from our standards. So those standards that we picked, we're not just going to like toss them aside after we've picked the vocabulary out of them. Those are actually the standards we're intending to teach. So were those standards rooted in some way or linked in some way to the outcome of writing, or were those standards really more aligned to knowledge building concepts? So we have to be very careful and very articulate in our understanding, very clear in our understanding of what the standards are expecting students to know and be able to do at the completion of our instruction. So sometimes, like Tracy said in the question before, sometimes the target could be the construct of writing, actually a student demonstrating that construct. And at other times, maybe students are within the standard expected to produce some spelling. So that's that encoding, that sound symbol process that is represented in skills in the word recognition kind of strand, or if you will, the section of the simple view of reading. So it's a possibility that sometimes those are the skills that we're trying to measure. But on occasion, those are really not the skills that we're measuring. We really want to know more about the student's knowledge that they've built or the use of vocabulary within their writing. And that may be the focus of the standard itself. So in that case, we could sometimes scaffold the writing piece, the encoding part of writing, to get students closer to being able to demonstrate what they know of the content. So in the beginning, we started off our process by selecting those standards, building our large unit. If you recall back to the first video, we were selecting and using standards from Earth and Space Science from 5th grade, and we were clustering standards together to create this kind of unit approach with multiple standards on around a topic. But we have to move on in this case to these other layers of our planning, which include what does that look like in actual implementation or instruction. So from the standards, we're building kind of a pathway to learning. What are the skills we'll teach explicitly for each of the standards? How will we assess and measure? We've talked about assessment several times here. And what supports will we offer to students? And that's all part of, remember the OIP process that we talked about in that second video in step 3, where the plan comes together. That's really what we're talking about, bringing together the standards, the outline, and the supports for learners. So we know across a unit of study, there are going to be lots of different lessons that students are going to be engaging in. Every one of them could potentially include vocabulary, explicit vocabulary instruction, definitely vocabulary usage, I think would be almost universal across all of those lessons or activities or opportunities for learning. And so we want to be thinking about, of all the lessons that a student will experience during the unit of study, how many of them will require writing? And remember, from a teaching perspective, that sometimes is in our hands. We're the ones who decide whether a student will demonstrate their knowledge through maybe an experience versus a written expression. So we have to be very clear, does the standard require writing? And if so, what specifically does the standard say we're supposed to be not only teaching, but measuring? So remember, what we measure should be taught explicitly, and we can't have the measure without the explicit instruction. So every single time across our school day, as students are participating in learning and all of these different experiences where their knowledge and skills are building and building, we have to think about, how will they participate if writing and vocabulary are involved? Can we scaffold writing in some cases? And at other times, do we need to dig in and explicitly teach the writing structures, the actual letters themselves, and even the spellings of words? So we'll use an example here. Anita Archer talks about the use of using examples and non-examples with regard to vocabulary within writing. And so let's say, hypothetically, we're going back to that Earth and Space piece, and let's say we taught that vocabulary word about the Earth that was in our list. So we may say the Earth is round like a ball. We may actually have a physical representation of the Earth here that students can take a look at. They can get their hands on it. They can feel it. So in some of those maps or globes, you can actually feel the difference. The texture is different between land and water. So we know that the Earth actually has structures of land that protrude from the water. And it's where we live. There are lots of factors here that play a role. We know that the Earth has all of these different constructs, but we also know the Earth is not other things. So in the context of writing, we need to know our facts. And we're going to represent those facts in our writing. So those non-examples could play a role here. The Earth is not flat. We can physically see that it's not. The whole Earth is not covered in water, because we can clearly see the difference between land and water here. And the Earth is not Mars. It's not, we don't live on Mars. This is not Mars. It's not a representation of that. So using those examples and non-examples could potentially help students with their understanding and kind of facts related to writing. Now, if we are going to use the term Earth, not only do we need our the word itself, but if the writing is required, the spelling of the word Earth is required in our writing, We also need to know how to spell it. So we need to know how to pronounce it or say that word. We need to know the parts of the word when we pronounce it. So earth. And then how is earth spelled or orthographically? What are the actual graphemes that we are going to write on the paper that represent those specific sounds? And so again, all of this is explicitly taught before we would expect a student to have to spell that word in context in printed assignment or something of that nature. So it's a possibility, if spelling is required, that we may have to adapt some things for certain students. Some students may be spelling using switch adaptation or technology. Other students may be using just some concrete examples of that spelling where they're sound by sound, letter by letter encoding words and then producing them in print. And so we need to ask ourselves every single time we are assigning a writing task within our classroom, is spelling or encoding required within this specific piece of writing? And when it's required, we have to very clearly communicate that with students. And not only are we saying you must spell certain words correctly, but we have to ensure that we taught the spelling of those words prior to that expectation happening. So this gets us into how will students produce these spellings? So if spelling is required, let's say yes, the answer is yes to that. We need to make sure that every student has access to the tools that they need to put whatever this spelling is in print. So in all of our cases, we're going to go from that phonological awareness or our understanding of how language has sounds, and we go from language to the printed letter or the grapheme itself. Some students, as they're thinking about the letter, they may actually physically in their mind's eye see the letter constructed. They may also, if we're using alternate forms of language, they may feel the letter through brailled letter structures or possibly hand signs for finger spelling of words. It's a possibility they may actually, in their mind's eye, again, see the spelling of the word through hand signs. And for other students, they may be keyboarding. So it's a possibility they may even think or feel the keyboard as they're spelling these words. So what are the tools that students will need in addition to traditional paper and pencil for this writing task? And do they have access to them? It's a possibility for some of our students, thinking back of that learning progression. Remember, some skills are targeted at grade level, and we know that we have a writing task at hand. And let's say we're in middle school or high school, it's a possibility that still some learners may need foundational supports. Even so much so as to go back to the letter structure or the letter parts. I have seen and worked with students who still, in some cases, they spend a lot of mental energy on how is the letter, whatever, P, K, D, whatever, how is it constructed? And they spend so much energy actually constructing the letter, that time that it takes. They may lose their train of thought for the whole sentence they wanted to write. They may have a lot of challenge with actually encoding the words. Sound symbol correspondence may be rocky. And so that may interrupt the flow of their writing. So we need to just be very aware of what is a student using, what skills do they have for writing, and what skills might they need some interventions within. So tier 2 or possibly tier 3 interventions to really go back and support that writing structure. They may even need to practice writing structures, including letter constructs, and they may need to see those letters in print in different ways. So even seeing them through photographs, like can you even find and determine or distinguish the letter A in the case of Alphabet City? Can you see the A? And how is it constructed? And how would we write it then based on that construct? And practice makes perfect on that. We do need kids to be able to practice. And the same thing with typing. If we would expect students to type, we would probably go back and practice that as well. So when we get to the place where students are ready to write, and maybe we have students who are like physically writing, paper, pencil, pen and paper writing, we need to ensure that they have the supports that they need to share their understanding of the meaning of these words. So let's say hypothetically, we have just engaged in a full unit of study on the body, the systems of the body. We've studied the skeletal system and the muscular system and the digestive and the nervous and all of those systems. And we've gained a lot of information. And so now the product for demonstrating this knowledge, what do students recall from all of these systems of the body? We want to know what they remember. So let's say, for example, in order to scaffold this piece of writing, students may almost need kind of a template structure. Let's say the students are required to at least write one sentence, or maybe they're required to write a paragraph about what they remember of each system of the body. If the target is really on the content, so really the focus of the outcome is really the content itself, so the systems of the body is the focus, we can definitely scaffold that writing process for paragraph writing or sentence writing with kind of a template-based approach. So in this case, the template came from The Important Book by Margaret Wise Brown. And what we love about this book is it's a wonderful example. It gives actually examples of clear and concise sentences, so opening sentences for a paragraph. And every poem within the book is actually written in paragraph format. So it has an opening sentence, supporting details, and then a closing sentence, which actually then can be taken and used as a template of sorts so that a student can produce a piece of writing that's very clear and coherent about what they know about the system of the body. So this particular student happened to write particularly about the respiratory system. And they say the important thing about breathing is that it keeps us alive and it gives us oxygen. So they wrote their sentence specific to that system. And we know from that writing that they do have some understanding about that system of the body. And they pulled away and gained some not only great knowledge about that system, but did you hear the vocabulary there? So there are vocabulary elements represented. But let's say possibly that the actual writing process was not the target. Let's say we're doing some note taking. So maybe we've offered some students a graphic organizer. If the students are pulling information from text, in this case, they are reading different texts about different habitats or ecosystems, and they were specifically charged with finding different animals that could sustain life in certain habitats. So they were just organizing those animals into this kind of quadrant-based graphic organizer structure. This isn't really the time. The target is not about spelling. It's not really about a specific type of writing. So we don't have to write a narrative or an expository piece of text here. We're just trying to quickly capture some information. So it is a possibility in this case that the students may use some supports for writing, in this case, images or words that are pre-generated, and students can capture their information in print or digitally pretty quickly. And this, in this case, was scaffolding over that word recognition skill set to really get to the concrete language comp piece. And likewise, in this lab report, the students were engaged in experimentation on conductors and non-conductors of electricity. So they went through a battery of tests and they had to ultimately report which items were conductors and then why. Why were those conductors of electricity versus the others that were not? And so this is again a representation where the focus is really not on the writing itself, but more the content behind the lab. And so again, we're scaffolding over the word rec piece here to get to the language comprehension part. So it's a possibility that sometimes we really want to know what students know about the vocabulary themselves. So can they really identify and determine very specific vocabulary based on meaning? So in this case, they had visual examples. They had been looking under microscopes. They looked at different cell types. And we wanted to know whether they could recall the construct of each of these different cell types. Could they pick it out from kind of this lineup or a choice of options? And could they then maybe share a little bit of information about it? So we definitely want to make sure that sometimes the writing does include specific knowledge about vocabulary itself. We're not necessarily writing, again, sentences or narrative, but we're putting our thoughts and our understandings on paper. And the same thing would be true here. Writing in many cases is required for filling in graphic organizers, but is the spelling required? And again, what's the target for the outcome here? Is it spelling or is it understanding of the concept? So in labeling the layers of the earth, writing, a written product is produced, but maybe the focus in assessment is not the spelling piece itself, but just the understanding. So it is a possibility, though, that students do want to really write down their thoughts and ideas in print, and we want to give them lots of options. At the beginning, Tracy, you talked a little bit about that motivation, that engagement, like what's causing kids to really pick up the pencil, get out the keyboard, whatever their tool that they use for writing is, and really put their thinking on paper. And so in this case, some of the things that maybe motivate students are experiences that they're having. So while students are engaging in learning, while they're going through experimentation, while they're on field trips and adventures, it's the perfect opportunity to take photographs of all of those experiences and really have students talk about it, write about it. And even so much so that we could compile everybody's thoughts and experiences together into these unit-based books where they're really talking through, it's almost that reflective thinking and cognitive processing around what was it that we learned and how do I know that I learned this and what were our experiences and what did they tell us. So you can even see here an excerpt from one of the books where they ask a critical question. Have you ever wondered what a certain animal, like an owl in this case, finds to eat out so late at night? They're nocturnal, so what are they finding to eat out there at night? Like who's out running around at that point in time? And so they went on this adventure, this journey to figure it out, and then they wrote about it. So they had photographic evidence of everything that they discovered in their research, and they compiled that together into a book that were authored by students. And it is nice to have those books within our classrooms. We want student writing to be showcased, and sometimes that is the motivator for them to make sure that they can share their writing with other people. So what about when students are having writing challenges and they really need to focus in on their writing, or they may have goals, or we need to write goals for them for writing? We need to be very specific about how we develop those goals. And so we put a couple of tips in here on how to write specific goals for writing. Now, sometimes students will already have writing goals that we can integrate in to any writing task that we do throughout our school day. And we can collect data on writing that could contribute to something like an IEP or another specialized learning plan that students have. But if we're writing the goal and we just have discovered a need and we're writing the goal, of course, we're going to determine what is the need based on our data. What did we discover? What did we figure out the student was struggling with? And we want to make sure that the standards are aligned with that specific need. So what standard were we trying to meet when this need kind of cropped up? So this is how standards-based or standards-aligned IEPs come about. We need to be very explicit about what specifically the student is going to learn and demonstrate. We need to be so specific that we're targeting one skill at a time so that we can support it clearly and give explicit, direct instruction on that skill to make sure that it's fully developed. We need to make sure that in our writing of goals and objectives that we use verbs that are both observable and measurable. We want to make sure that we can actually see what it is that the student is supposed to be demonstrating. If we know that a student needs to make progress across a long series of skills to get to the grade level target, we want the learning progression to be available and know where the student is on that progression and move them forward. We want them to have lots of growth over time and, of course, identify potential barriers and right away be very proactive in trying to overcome those barriers or address them, usually using those supports and services that we talked about in our last video clip about scaffolding student work and need. Usually section 7 of the IEP is a great resource on those scaffolds. So there are a couple of tools that we'll put in the resource section that you can download and use later if you find yourself in a place where you are trying to target specific goals and objectives for a student in their writing or vocabulary, or even those foundational skills that we've talked about in word recognition with sound symbol correspondence. It's a possibility that any of those could be the target need behind a goal or objectives. And so there's specific guidance about what goes into a goal. It has to align with the need that we saw in the student. Of course, it has to be observable and measurable. If scaffolds are required or tools are required, that we're writing them right into the goal. And then how long do you think it's going to take for the students to accomplish that goal? If you give an approximate, you can touch base and see if they are accomplishing the goal over time. And there's just a little table or a template that can help you pull those goals together. So we'll put those in the resources section so you can use them later. All right, Tracy, I think it is time to take a look at what administrators will see when they're out there in those classrooms related to writing and vocabulary.
Yes, it is indeed. So, well, we have come to the end of our 5 sessions, and administrators, as you're out in your classrooms, you can really look for materials that provide scaffolding for instruction, not only of understanding vocabulary, but of showing that understanding through writing. So decoding and encoding cues, visual images, are you seeing those? Are your teachers using templates and graphic organizers and different supports for students to meet their needs and provide access? So that gets us into the second one, students access writing in a manner that meets their particular needs. Shauna gave you plenty of examples of different ways to access writing, as well as keeping that goal in mind to know if writing is the goal, how are they producing writing, how are they accessing that, and when can we scaffold around the actual writing task to get to a response so that they show you what they know. So keeping those two things in mind as to what is the real goal of the task. Also, you can look at, are all students engaged and motivated to actively participate in writing experiences? So this is something, engagement is huge, because without engagement, students are not going to invoke a way to really understand the material or to learn. Fourthly, teachers identify the vocabulary words and teach sound symbol recognition skills, as well as letter formation, before students are expected to produce writing. Shauna referred to this a couple times, where before we're expecting students to produce something, writing, to give us an answer for anything in any way, we need to make sure that we explicitly teach the how. How are we expecting to do that? Our expectations are clear, and students are taught the structures of that expectation. Next, all students have access to all grade level content to build background knowledge and vocabulary for writing, in particular, tier 2 and 3 words. Tier 2 words are very important when developing writing. Those are the words that, no matter what subject area students are writing about or for, they will utilize those tier 2 words to make their writing interesting, to make it more colorful, to make it more specific. And so that is really important, that those things are planned for ahead of time and even shared across grade levels. So all teachers know, I know this student knows this word. I'd like to see them use it in their writing now. Next is clarity around the purpose of writing and how to structure writing for that purpose. So do students know that they're writing a narrative? Do they know they're writing an analysis? If they do they know how to structure that? Do they know the difference between an analysis and an argument or an explanation? All of those might take different forms, and they're all writing for different purposes. And so teaching those purposes and the structures around those is very important. And lastly, writing structures such as syntax, how the sentences go together and are structured, as well as mechanics and punctuation, those types of things, making sure that they are explicitly taught and expectations are clear, especially if students are going to be graded on mechanics or those types of things. We can't assume that students know and understand those concepts from earlier grades. So if you know that you're grading on syntax in an assignment, making sure beforehand that students really understand the syntactic concepts that you're going to be grading on. Rubrics are great here, those types of things. But supporting your teachers in being able to embed those types of instructions into their lessons is awesome. So we hope that these look-fors gave you an idea as administrators, as when you're out and about supporting your staff, things to look for, things to know if they're happening or not happening, and if not, who to get involved, and professional development for your staff to be able to meet this criteria for really delving into writing for all of your students, tip to tip on your expectations.
Right. Thank you so much, Tracy. So I am so excited that we've had this wonderful journey. I feel like we've shared a lot of great information, and I really appreciate you being here to share your expertise with everybody as well. So I'm really hopeful that a lot of information was gained by participants or people who are viewing the video clips here. And we definitely wish you all very well in your journey to select and implement vocabulary instruction within your classrooms. So I think our journey has come to an end here with our last video. So I'm kind of sad about that, but also excited for people that they get to move on to that implementation stage. So until we see all of you again, we wish you all well and best wishes in your vocabulary instruction journey. And we can't wait to maybe hear from you with examples about how that's going. We'd love to showcase examples you can see throughout the series. We have shared some visual examples that actually came from the field, from our teachers, from our administrators, and we would love to hear from you to include some of your examples later on down the road. So thanks everybody for joining us, and we hope to connect at some point again in the future. Take care, everybody. Thank you.